Well, it turns out Russia is the U.S.'s #1 enemy, at least in the mind of Republican presidential candidate Mitt Romney. It all stemmed from this exchange between President Obama and Russian President Dmitry Medvedev, all caught on camera.
My wife's electric, yeah. After my election, I have more flexibility. Yeah, I understand. I translate this
Now, Romney took this opportunity to pounce on President Obama for daring to be flexible with Russia. Here's his response on CNN.
And if he's planning on doing more and suggest to Russia that he has things he's willing to do with them, he's not willing to tell the American people. This is to Russia. This is, without question, our #1 geopolitical foe. They fight every cause for the world's worst actors. The idea that he has some more flexibility in mind for Russia is very, very troubling indeed.
So is Mitt Romney and the Republican elite set on bringing back the negative attitudes reminiscent of the Cold War? To help answer that and more, I'm joined now by Ivan Eland, Senior Fellow for the Independent Institute. Welcome to the show, Ivan.
Thanks.
So Romney says Russia is our #1 enemy. Do you think he really believes that?
No, I think it's campaign rhetoric, and I think it doesn't really square with the facts too well. And I think people probably should be criticizing Romney for his lack of knowledge of foreign affairs rather than for Barack Obama saying the obvious. And politicians in America always get in trouble for telling the truth. That's when they get in trouble, so that's why they don't do it very often. And Barack Obama telling the truth in this case, that it's easier to get an agreement after an election than before it, is certainly true.
Certainly, that is true, and he was just speaking the truth. Now, this statement that Russia is the #1 threat in the U.S., I mean, obviously, Al-Qaeda, you would think that it's a no-brainer that they would be a bigger threat than Russia. But so when somebody like GOP presidential candidate Mitt Romney pins Russia up against terrorist groups, what do you think that says about his foreign policy views?
Well, he does have neoconservative advisors, and that gives us some pause and, for concern, I think. But also, Romney has proved very flexible in his views on almost everything, and that's what the criticism of him. So who knows what he'll do in office? Many times you get presidents who have an image, like Richard Nixon was an anti-communist, and he was the first president that went to communist China and opened relations with them. Many times the Republicans in national security, because their image is tougher, they can sometimes work the back rooms to get a deal. So we never know what presidents are going to do when they're in office. But of course, this is just campaign rhetoric. And unfortunately, it does say something about being able to drag back the Cold War in the United States and win a few votes from it. So I think that's particularly on the Republican side, but you even see Democrats doing it once in a while to be tough. And it's mostly rhetoric. I think politicians in office, when they have to make the decisions, and particularly Romney, will probably be more pragmatic.
And I also want to point out the Russian leader Dmitry Medvedev's response to this. He said, quote, "As for ideological cliches, I've already spoken on the subject. I always get very cautious when I see a country resort to phrases such as our #1 enemy. It is very reminiscent of Hollywood and a certain period of history." So there he is kind of mocking Mitt Romney for his language. Is this how people abroad view the GOP candidates?
Well, I think it's sort of dangerous because when you talk about countries that have many nuclear weapons, and Russia and the U.S. combined have 95% of the world's nuclear weapons, Russia is still a very formidable power and a nuclear superpower. And I think when you use this kind of a rhetoric, even to get elected or in campaigns, it's kind of dangerous. And it does whip up anti-Russian sentiment, even though it's being used probably just to get elected.
And Medvedev also went on to say that it is 2012, not the 1970s, kind of referring to the Cold War era. Do you think that this is the rhetoric that the GOP candidates are going to continue to revert back to?
Well, they're trying to look for enemies. Barack Obama managed to kill Osama bin Laden, so he's not quite as vulnerable as many Democratic presidents are on national security. So you know, they've got to come up with something. They're working the Iran thing. That's the number one. And now with this comment, I think they're going to start working the Russian angle. You need an enemy when you're trying to get elected. And I think, and they also are looking for things to criticize the president on as being soft on foreign policy, because this attack usually works for the Republicans in some manner. So that I think they're pulling out the enemies. Maybe it'll be China next week.
So do you think this is kind of just what the GOP is looking for? Somebody that is, you know, willing to take these very hardline, hawkish, tough stances in terms of foreign policy, someone that is willing to be partisan?
Well, I think this is, you have to, in the United States, there's campaign rhetoric, and then there's what they actually do. What's more worrisome to me, rather than this rhetoric, is the neoconservative advisors that Romney has. And when you have the president captive of one viewpoint, and it's a hardline viewpoint, I think that's a problem. And if he were to get elected, I think those people would be put in high office, and we saw what happened with George W. Bush when that happened. So that's the real problem, those advisors, rather than this rhetoric.
And so do you think, so you are worried that this rhetoric can actually transmit into action?
Well, I think it will be tempered because the U.S. does and Russia do cooperate on the WTO, on Afghanistan's supply routes, on fighting Islamic radicalism, and on the START treaty. There's more to be done there. A deal can be worked out with tactical nuclear weapons and maybe even missile defense if the two countries, you know, after the election, this could happen.
Now, in the end, do you think that this comment by Mitt Romney, however ridiculous it was, do you think that it helped or hurt his campaign?
Well, I think it probably helped his campaign. If I were on the Obama, I would go after him and say, listen, that just doesn't square with the facts that Russia is our greatest enemy, and then I would show my knowledge of foreign affairs to refute that. But Obama hasn't done that. He's played defense, and I think that's a wrong campaign strategy for him. I think it could be a good campaign strategy to show that Mitt Romney doesn't know that the Cold War is over.
That apparently is the case. Ivan, pleasure to have you on the show. That was Ivan Eland, Senior Fellow for the Independent Institute.